This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granick-Allen. It's been more than half a year since the infamous October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas, followed by retaliation in Gaza. Kidnapped Israeli victims are still missing. Palestinians are fleeing, and the world is divided as to what the just and right course of action should be. Amidst all of this, anti-Semitism is on the rise, pro-Hamas protests are increasing, and encampments are growing on Canadian university campuses. As Israel expands its offensive and orders evacuation in Gaza's southern city of Rafah, many in the international community are calling for a ceasefire. But is that fair? Israel is, after all, responding to an attack from Hamas. But how does one separate Hamas from Palestinians? What is the relationship? What will happen to the growing humanitarian crisis in Palestine as the war wages on? And what of a global response? How will Canada and the US support their publicly stated ally Israel against this terror attack? And what will happen to the Palestinian people as Israel makes good on its promise to wipe out Hamas? Well, joining me now is Dr. Casey Babb, Senior Fellow at the MacDonald-Laurier Institute and International Fellow at the Institute for International Security Studies at the University of Tel Aviv. Dr. Casey Babb, thank you so much for coming on. This is such an important discussion, and I'm really pleased that you can participate for it. So why don't we bring people up to speed? Walk us through where things stand in the conflict, including maybe a brief timeline over the past, year's events or so.
Well, I think the timeline that, I should cover right now is probably the last 7 months. So, as you alluded to, Tanya, the events on October 7th, the most horrific, barbaric attacks against a Jewish population since the Holocaust. 1,200 people, 1,200 civilians at least murdered, hundreds dragged back into Gaza, mass documented sexual assaults, mutilations, Holocaust survivors killed, children murdered, parents murdered in front of their children, children murdered in front of their parents. Just the most sadistic, appalling attack, frankly, that I've ever seen, and I think most people. And that's saying something given the fact that I've been studying global conflict and international security my entire adult life. In the time since, as you mentioned, there's been this large-scale offensive in Gaza carried out by the Israeli Defense Forces, and this has sort of come in different waves. Initially, of course, it was very intense, very heavy, and then, in my view, because of the international community, international pressure, which is disproportionate and only placed on Israel, on the Jewish state, they essentially rolled back and paused on many of the activities that were probably working in their favor. And as a result, despite the fact that Hamas has been degraded significantly over the last several months, they've been able to recoup, rearm, and now recontrol much of Gaza, which people aren't talking about. So you still have remaining hostages. How many are still alive? That remains to be seen. And of course, you have many which are deceased. Under what conditions? We don't know. So Israel has to secure the remaining living hostages, the hostages who have passed on, and they need to get rid of Hamas. And so that's where we are right now. And so Israel's in a very difficult situation that no other country on earth would ever find itself in, where they are between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to defend themselves, but they're also trying to appease the international community.
Yeah, you've said it well. It's a rock and a hard place because, and I'm surprised. I follow the news obviously, but it seemed like the tide had turned against Israel, and I was quite caught off guard with that. And we can talk about that later on what that looks like in Canada. You're right. Israel did commit to repatriating those hostages, rescuing them, and I will remember the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is they're going to wipe out Hamas. How close, in the 30 seconds we have to commercial, how close are they to wiping out Hamas?
They're not that close. And I will say, this isn't just a war on Hamas. This is a war against an ideology, a perverse ideology that's been intensifying but that's been around for millennia, and Israel has a very challenging task ahead if they
Okay,
want to snuff out Hamas.
I'm going to pause you there. We'll be right back.